So, the year is 1973. Britain Ferry, known as Chikushou to its natives, is a small town in the south of Wales. The town is home to nothing. This is rural Wales we're talking about. Let's get to moving. You see, Wales isn't just home to sheep. Joseph William Kappen, known as Joe Kappen, was born in 1941 to a large family, consisting of around 7 children, including him. Early on in his life, his parents separated, leaving the young Kappen in a broken family home. He was, as a consequence, raised by his stepfather in Port Talbot. At age 12, he was convicted of several misdemeanors, including, but not limited to, car theft, petrol theft, house theft, which is what you would call a burglary.
Well, I'm not a crook.
And punch theft, known in the English vernacular as assault. In 1962, Kappen upgraded himself from grade B delinquent to class A creep when he met Christine Powell, a 17-year-old girl he found attractive. Ugh. He would later marry her in February of 1964, which, side note, was also around the same time as the Beatles' appearance on Ed Sullivan, starring the British invasion. 10 years after the wedding, Kappen would show that he was a decent, law-abiding husband of the family when he immediately got arrested for burglary. Unfortunately for, quite frankly, everybody, Kappen would not stay in prison. He sexually assaulted his wife 10 days after leaving prison. He then made this a regular practice of his. Kappen would later strangle the family dog in front of his son, saying it was too old, killing the poor dog. As is common knowledge, serial killers before targeting humans are often abusive of animals. Around this time, Kappen was also working as a bouncer, not for a fair Welsh wage though, but because his libido was on DEFCON 1 for minors. This even culminated in Kappen even attempting to force himself on a 15-year-old girl, but fortunately enough she was able to escape. Look, if you still think Joseph Kappen would not be in the headspace to commit the crimes we will talk about later on, and yet think there is no sufficient evidence for what I'll be talking about, well, I don't know what else to say. Kappen was an abhorrent man. Before that, please give me 5 seconds of your time to ask that you subscribe. It really means a lot to me and I hope we can reach 1,000 by the end of the year. On a dimly lit Saturday night, the 14th of July, 1973, a schoolgirl, 16 years of age, was on a night out in the town of Chikushou. 3 days later, her body was found, strangled with her own skirt, left in a desolate area of the rural Welsh town, mere miles away from town center. She was later identified to be Sandra Newton. Newton had been the victim of cruel and unjust murder, abducted for the charge of hitchhiking. She just wanted to go home. Instead, she was left in a ditch of a nearby coal mine. Police suspected immediately that it had been the work of a local, though they had many difficulties finding the culprit. 2 months later, Sunday, September 16, 1973. It was hours before sunrise. Geraldine Hughes and Pauline Floyd, 2 16-year-old Welsh teenagers, hitched a lift home after a Saturday night out at a club in Llandarcy, the second largest city of the Welsh countryside. The next morning, they were found dead, assaulted, used, having been the victim of another vice of human cruelty. One girl of the pair, though identified who exactly, had seemed to attempt to escape but was ultimately unsuccessful. The deaths would be dubbed the Saturday Night Killings. They occurred near the Port Talbot steelworks, which employed 30,000 men. So there's that. You also have to question a lot of the drivers. 10,000 passed by the roads around this time. So all in all, you have what? Around 24,000 suspects in 1970s small-town Wales? That's the entire population of some countries, plus dividends. And speaking of dividends, you even have the Heath government in the 1973 oil crisis. Britain was undergoing financial turmoil, so a pay freeze was set by November 1972, a massive hit to police morale. It wasn't gonna be easy, it wasn't gonna be fast, and what ended up happening is that it didn't happen at all. Nobody could find the culprit behind all of this. Enter the late 1990s, or what many would call the Y2K era. This is the time period New Jeans bases its entire personality on. It's 1997 in the UK. You have the landslide of Tony Blair. But most importantly for this story, you have the advancements in DNA tech, which fueled the reopening of the Saturday Night killing case. DNA tech has advanced so much to the point that a profile of the killer's DNA was able to be isolated from the clothes of Hughes and Floyd. Some scientific mumbo-jumbo ensues. Basically, what happens is that you have this new copy of a DNA save file, and police just looked it up like it was a missing doc file you were gonna submit 3 minutes before the due date, you know what I'm saying? In 2001, they were successful in looking it up. No results. Look, it was in the 90s, things moved slower. Around this time, there was a bunch of hoo-ha surrounding another serial killer named Fred West, with the media outlets trying him to the murders. But as we all know, it wasn't him. 35,000 people, all across Wales, were initially identified for DNA testing. But police recruited a psychological profiler, somebody whose job it is to basically read other people's thoughts like goddamn Charles Xavier, who was able to reduce the number of a priority list to 500. How did he did it? I don't know. Long story short, Kappen was suspect number 200, and became police's prime suspect for the murders. Kappen had long been dead, dying in 1991, but DNA tech was so good they just dug up his useless tar pit of a body and blasted him on the table with a bunch of experts. They found out the truth, it was indeed Kappen. What's interesting is when they dug up the dead man's bones, a storm suddenly began and thunder cracked the sky. Yup, that dude is 100% Welsh Satan. Banish him for eternity. The Kappen investigation was the first in the world to use familial DNA testing in order to posthumously identify a serial killer. So there is something about Wales that's interesting. If they were alive today, the 3 victims would be around 68. Just because they died in the 70s shouldn't mean that their entire life should be erased. I hope I didn't come across as offensive towards the victims in this video. I hope that they rest in peace.